It's pretty much off-season time, right? Now, I didn't want to be the guy who's a Debbie Downer or whatever, but I kinda don't really have the feeling that NHL hockey is gonna return this year. I'm not really too sure about the playoffs, but I know for that regular season, I don't really think things are going to end off well if you're looking to watch any more hockey games. So, I'm gonna call this period the off-season. I don't think anybody is gonna shame me for that. But I was thinking about this off-season and I was like, do I want to get into a whole bunch of just standard, regular gameplay commentaries where we talk about different topics around the teams that I like, and we don't really focus on anything that's happening that's newsworthy, but instead we bring up our own topics and we talk about things. The old Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 3, Black Ops 2, Black Ops 1 gameplay commentary format. You think about something to talk about, it's not really related to anything in the world, you just think about it, and boom, it comes out on top of video game footage. Let's talk about the Vancouver Canucks in the playoffs, because this is something that I was just thinking about a little bit ago, and I wanted to take a look at specifically what we thought this team would be. Back in September, what did the Vancouver Canucks leave as an impression on the NHL fan base, the media, and all the other teams? What was that perception? And furthermore, I also wanted to talk about the idea of what we're going to have next year. Because I don't know if the playoffs are going to go on this year. If I had to guess, I would probably say no. So if we're going to talk about the Vancouver Canucks in the playoffs, rather than only focusing on this year, I kind of wanted to talk about next year too. So going back to September in 2019, what were the Vancouver Canucks supposed to be? They were supposed to be a team that people thought could contend for a playoff spot. A team that could play some meaningful games in March. A team that could go out there, do their thing, and win a few games, lose a few games, and eventually squeak into the playoffs, maybe in a wild card, maybe in the third spot in the Pacific. Well, for the most part, meaningful games in March is what we got. We got some bad ones, some stinkers, some ones that they really should have won, and we had some other ones where they totally dominated. But the Vancouver Canucks in general, if you look at it today, they are not in a playoff spot. But that is only based off of the current day NHL standings. If you remember the video that I made when I talked about the NHL suspending its season, that was the video where I was paired up side by side with the World Juniors autograph guy. Yeah, if you know what I'm talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In that video, we talked about how the Canucks currently, they're not in the playoffs, but they haven't played as many games as a lot of these other teams. So if you go into the playoff rankings, you go into the playoff format, and you change it up. You don't do it by points, instead you measure it by points percentage. That is the total amount of points that a team has divided by the total amount of points that they could have achieved, aka their games played multiplied by 2. If you do it by points percentage, the Vancouver Canucks are indeed in the playoffs. They're actually in the third Pacific spot against the Edmonton Oilers, who are in the second Pacific spot. So even though the team doesn't have that many games played compared to the guys like Calgary, even though the team currently isn't in the postseason dance like Calgary and all of those other teams are, they still are technically a playoff contender. So, just taking a look at it at face value, the Vancouver Canucks do indeed force themselves into the playoffs if the playoffs go on with what we have already played as a season. Now, there are further questions that go along with that. When you take a look at the Vancouver Canucks and you say, okay, they made the playoffs, they're up against an Edmonton Oilers team in the first round. I want you to comment down in the comments below. Do you think this Vancouver Canucks team that we have assembled today can beat an Oilers team 4 times in 7 games played? Comment down below on whether or not you think they can do it, and also I want you to note how sure you are on your opinion. Because I think anybody who's been watching the Canucks this season can see that yes, they probably could win a series against Edmonton, but how likely is that? What's the likelihood that a newly assembled team like the Canucks that just got all these new guys and is forcing its way in the W column night in and night out can get it done against McDavid, Draisaitl, and Yamamoto? No, seriously. I'm not trying to be cynical or whatever, I'm just asking for your opinion. Because if you were to ask me, I think for sure they can do it, but I don't know if I would bet on them doing it with 100% certainty. Sure, I want them to because I'm a Canucks fan, but like, would I be lying to myself if I said, yeah, they can 100% and they will beat the Oilers with no doubts? Yeah, no, I couldn't say that. Sure, this team is good on paper, but we've seen time and time again the idea of this team not showing up, and this team not getting results. There are some games that this team plays where they look so good, but they just can't beat a goalie. They can't buy a goal. They can't do anything to get the puck in the net, even though it looks like they're doing all the right things. This team is a team that, if they make the playoffs, I've always been saying this throughout the whole year, but I'll say it again, just a few games in the playoffs. A first-round exit, I don't really care. Just games in the playoffs would be so valuable to this team because it would allow them to actually experience what's it like being in that environment. Guys like Petey, Hughes, Horvat was only in the playoffs once and they got eliminated. Horvat, Boeser, all these guys going back into the postseason and actually doing things and learning how it is in the NHL. That to me is extraordinarily valuable. Who knows? Maybe the addition of Boeser back into the lineup and the addition of Toffoli via trade is enough to force the Canucks to get into a status where they can indeed beat the Oilers in a best-of-7 series. But when you get to that point, what happens next? How far is this Vancouver Canucks team capable of making it in the postseason? That's another question I would like you to answer because I know I certainly can't really decide. The Vancouver Canucks, to me, are a team that, honestly, could have done some damage, but I'm not sure if we're ever going to see that in the next few months, pretty much, because I don't think the season is going to come back. But then, that opens the realm up to next year. Now, next year is going to be weird, because the Vancouver Canucks have the option on losing out on Chris Tanev, Troy Stecher, Josh Levo, Jacob Markstrom, Jake Virtanen, Adam Gaudette, and the big one, Tyler Toffoli. There are some other guys in there too, but like, among roster players, it's mostly those guys that people have their eyes on when it comes to the free agency market. A lot of the Vancouver Canucks playoff success and potential playoff contention next year heavily relies on those guys that I listed. In particular, it's Tanev, it's Toffoli, well, not really Toffoli, it's Jacob Markstrom, and I guess you could say Jake Virtanen too? And the reason I don't call Toffoli in that bunch is because this team was already a playoff team without Toffoli. Let's just say that right here. Toffoli just made this team so much better. We have a legit deadly top 6 now, and it's a shame because we only got to use it for like 7 games or whatever. But Brock Boeser came back, which made the Toffoli trade not really super important anymore because, like, the only reason they traded for Toffoli was to get a replacement for Boeser. But because Boeser came back so early, Toffoli is just an extra added asset who is very, very good. So if he leaves out in the offseason, which I personally don't think is going to happen, but you never know, I wouldn't be surprised if the Vancouver Canucks were still contending for a playoff spot next year because they were already doing that this year without Toffoli. That's only assuming if Boeser, Petey, Miller, all those guys stay healthy. And sure, of course, you're going to have to re-sign some of those guys, so probably a few of them are going to come back, right? But in a world where Toffoli comes back, Markstrom comes back, and Tanev comes back, let's just say those big 3 guys, they come back. This team, honestly, given a full year of that lineup, and given a full year of developing chemistry between Toffoli, Petey, and Miller, and Pearson, Brock, and Horvat, I think this team is going to be a legit top 3 Pacific team if they continue in that trend next year. Of course, they need to keep their guys that I just mentioned, but this team has gotten so much better that it's crazy to me. Just taking a look at where we were a year ago, before the trade deadline, with good Branson on our team instead of Pearson, and losing games left and right, and Ben Hutton as a top 4 D-man. To see this progression to go from that to this in 1 year, it's nuts. And I just really am kind of pissed off that we're not going to be able to see any more of this lineup foreseeably if Toffoli doesn't resign, if Tanev doesn't resign, if whatever. It was ephemeral, but it was a sign of what can happen. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.